order. My name is Judge Nancy Nguyen. Scoring judges, please go ahead and mute yourselves as well as turn off your video, and these should remain off until trial ends. Everyone should also have their video set to hide all non-video participants. And then I think we should have everyone go ahead and switch to speaker view for the statements. Can the attorneys go ahead and please make appearances?
Good afternoon, Your Honor, opposing counsel, and members of the jury. My name is Linnea Stuart, and I am joined by my co-counsel, Hannah Lee.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
And along with Ms. Lee, we represent the state in today's case of Government v. Bassett.
Thank you, counsel.
Good afternoon, Your Honor, and good afternoon, members of the jury. My name is Hannah Curphey, and I represent Ms. Cara Bassett.
Good afternoon. Are you joined by co-counsel today, or is it just you?
Oh, my apologies. I have an acting second chair, Ms. Ione Averaldo-Jones.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon. Are both sides ready to make their opening statements?
Prior to opening statements, the defense has one preliminary matter to address, Your Honor.
Sure, go ahead.
The defense would inquire as to whether Your Honor wishes for videos to be played for the court before they've been entered into evidence for authentication purposes.
You're asking if the video can be played just to establish the authentication?
Yes, Your Honor.
Just to the extent necessary to lay the foundation?
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, also before we begin, may I have permission to read into the record stipulation 7 and 9?
And this has been agreed upon by both parties?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, go ahead.
First of all, stipulation 7, exhibits 4 through 33 are pre-admitted and may be used for any time for any purpose. And 9, the defendant has elected to sit at counsel table, and given the online format, the prosecution need not fulfill the traditional requirement of identifying the defendant. And in addition, Your Honor, we would ask, given the online format, during objection responses, would you prefer us to ask you to respond, or would you prefer to ask us to respond?
Go ahead and make your objection, and I will let each side make their case, but I guess I'll direct whoever should talk at that time.
Yes, Your Honor. With that, the government's ready to proceed.
The defense is ready as well, Your Honor.
All right, I think now everyone should switch to speaker view. Attorneys, please remember, the attorney who's not presenting at the time, please make sure that you are muting your audio. Okay, all right, does the government wish to proceed with their opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor. He poisoned her dreams, so she poisoned him back. 3 years ago, John Clark, a husband, father, and businessman, was murdered. He was murdered on his own property. He was murdered by his own wife. See, John Clark's wife, Cara Bassett, had one dream: start a sanctuary to save elephants. In 2011, she and Mr. Clark got married, and Mr. Clark promised to help her with that dream. But after they got married, Mr. Clark started abusing the animals, locking them in cages and allowing people to touch them, even ride them. To the defendant, he was exploiting her babies. She argued with him, she yelled at him, she threw things at him, but as you'll hear, Mr. Clark wouldn't budge. And in 2017, you'll hear the defendant reached her limit. So on August 18th, 2017, the defendant took a syringe of tranquilizer and injected it into her husband. She drove his body to the Big Gum Swamp, a 13,000-acre marsh, and left him there. 1 week later, she called the police. Now, as the prosecution, we can't just tell you that. We have to prove it. And since we brought the defendant here for murder, we have to prove 2 things. First, that the defendant killed Mr. Clark, and second, that she did it intentionally. And we will do that today. First, we'll show you the plan. Next, we'll show you the weapon. And third, we'll show you the place. First, the plan. You'll hear from the FBI agent, Agent Branham, who investigated this case. You'll learn that 3 months before Mr. Clark disappeared, the defendant had him sign what's called a power of attorney document. Now, normally this means that if someone like Mr. Clark died or got sick, someone like Mrs. Bassett would take control of the property. But the defendant added another clause, a disappearance clause. If Mr. Clark disappeared, she would gain control of the elephant park and $8 million in access. So what happened next? Mr. Clark disappeared, and what the defendant thought was the perfect crime, but she left behind a trail of evidence. Second, the weapon. You'll hear that the defendant lives right next to where the park stores a powerful poison, carfentanil, an elephant tranquilizer. You'll hear that the defendant is one of the few people with access to that syringe. And on the night Mr. Clark disappeared, one of those syringes disappeared from the tranquilizer container for the first time. Third, you'll hear about the place. You'll hear that after that tranquilizer disappeared, Mr. Clark's van drove to a 13,000-acre swamp halfway across the state of Florida. You'll hear that algae from this swamp matched the defendant's van. No surprise, but it also matched the defendant's wheelchair and the defendant's boots. Now, after Mr. Clark disappeared, Miss Bassett never called him to ask where he was. She never texted him. She waited 1 week and then called the police. 6 weeks after Mr. Clark disappeared, she invoked the power of attorney, taking control of the elephant park and the $8 million in assets. Members of the jury, Mr. Clark poisoned the defendant's dreams, so she poisoned him back. At the end of this trial, we'll ask you to find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Is defense ready to proceed with their opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor. My client is being charged with a murder that never happened. That's right, a murder that never happened. Members of the jury, everything that the prosecution just told you assumes that Don Clark was murdered. But they omitted something hugely important. The key fact of this trial will not be that Miss Bassett and Mr. Clark had an imperfect marriage, or that Miss Bassett cared about elephants, or any forensic evidence that the prosecution presents. The key fact of this trial, members of the jury, will be the fact that Don Clark's body was never found. You will not hear any evidence that proves Mr. Clark is even dead, let alone murdered by his own wife. That alone will prevent the prosecution from meeting their burden. The prosecution, in an attempt to prove their case, will call FBI field agent Steph Branham. Mrs. Branham will testify that sniffer dogs weren't able to find Mr. Clark's body in the swamp that he visited that night. Agent Branham will testify that Mr. Clark's phone, wallet, and keys were never recovered. Agent Branham will testify that she was unable to extensively interview Don Clark's ex-wife, who said that Don Clark, quote, deserved to die. Agent Branham will testify that my client was cooperative and willingly gave consistent statements to police throughout her investigation. Most everything that Agent Branham will tell you will make complete sense. The only thing that won't make sense will be her conclusions. Then the defense will call Joe Young, who worked with Mr. Clark and Miss Bassett as a documentary filmmaker. Ms. Young will tell you that she collected over 2,000 hours of footage of the couple that the FBI never even asked about. Ms. Young will tell you that Don Clark owned a house in Costa Rica, which he regularly visited. Ms. Young will tell you that it was Don Clark, not Cara Bassett, whose behavior was out of the ordinary on the day of his disappearance. You'll see video footage from Joe Young's documentary that contradicts Agent Branham's claims that she interviewed all part staffers, but also that Don Clark sounded scared the day of his disappearance, but not of his wife. You'll hear that the FBI mishandled evidence and failed to follow up on leads. Joy Young will tell you that she did what the FBI should have done all along. She went to Costa Rica conducted interviews, searched Don Clark's Costa Rica house, which she concluded showed signs of being lived in. At the end of today's trial, given that my client is being tried for a murder that never happened, we will ask that you return a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Is the prosecution ready to call their first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The government calls Agent Steph Branham to the stand.
All right, at this time, I want to make sure everyone go ahead, switches to the gallery view so you can see the witness and both counsel at the same time. And whenever you're ready, you may proceed.
Good afternoon, Agent Branham. Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Good afternoon. My name is Senior Special Agent Steph Branham. I'm a lead investigator at the FBI.
How are you involved in today's case?
I was the lead investigator in the case of Don Clark's disappearance.
Now, before we go into your investigation, I'd like to talk about your background. Can you tell us about your training as a special agent?
Of course. I attended the FBI Academy in 2002, and since then, I've been an FBI agent for almost 18 years now, and every year to maintain my certification, I undergo an annual training that encompasses all parts of a criminal investigation.
And can you tell us about your experience as an FBI agent?
Of course. I currently specialize in violent crimes and specifically in the criminal investigation division. I've been an FBI agent for 18 years. I've been at the Jacksonville office in Florida for 5 years. And I've investigated over 100 cases ranging from murder to kidnapping.
When did you become involved in today's case?
My team was called to investigate on August 25th, 2017, when Don Clark was reported missing.
What were the main parts of your investigation?
Well, we looked for activity on August 18th, the day Don Clark disappeared. We looked for any potential murder weapons, and we looked for any potential motives.
I want to take these parts one at a time. But first, let's talk about the events you determined on August 18th. What was the first piece of evidence you used in order to do so?
We reviewed GPS records from one of the Elephant Park's vans.
Why did you do this?
We found the van not parked at the Elephant Park. It was parked at the Carrie Belleon Airport instead.
I'm now showing you Exhibit 31, the GPS records. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, this is the GPS records of that van.
And what did you learn from these GPS records?
I learned that on the night of August 18th, the van traveled from the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park, leaving at 11:17 to the Big Gum Swamp, where it arrived at 1:26 a.m. the next day.
And how far was this distance?
139 miles.
Now, after the van arrived at the Big Gum Swamp, where did it go next?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
After the van arrived at the Big Gum Swamp, where did it go next?
After it went to the Big Gum Swamp, it traveled to the Carrie Belleon Airport.
Now, I'm putting up an image of the Big Gum Swamp. Do you recognize this image?
Yes, ma'am. That's an image of the Big Gum Swamp we looked at.
How big is it?
It's 13,000 acres, ma'am.
Did you find any evidence other than the GPS records linking the Big Gum Swamp to the van?
Yes, we did. We conducted a forensic analysis, sampling algae from the Big Gum Swamp and samples of mud from the van that we found.
And did you find this van anywhere else other than this algae anywhere else other than the van?
Yes, ma'am. We found it on a wheelchair on the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park's property, and we also found it on the defendant's work boots.
Did you find evidence of a potential murder weapon on the defendant's property?
We did. We found an elephant tranquilizer called carfentanil.
You mentioned it's an elephant tranquilizer. What does that mean?
Well, it's specifically used to sedate elephants if they need to undergo surgery, and in the most extreme cases, it can be used to euthanize them.
Where is this syringe stored?
It's stored in the park's storage unit on the property.
show you Exhibit 19. Do you recognize this exhibit?
Yes, this is a copy of the log the park kept about carfentanil.
Now, according to this log, how many syringes should have been in that container on August 18th?
There should have been 24 syringes.
And how many did you find?
We only found 23.
Did you find any evidence that suggests that someone may have used this syringe for the elephants and just not recorded it?
No, ma'am, we found no evidence that suggested that.
Who had access to these syringes?
The park storage unit was locked. There were 4 employees that had the key. Kara, Dawn, 2 other employees, Kelsey Stebbins and Nate Garson.
You mentioned that Kara Bassett had access to this container. Did you ask the defendant about this syringe?
Yes, we did when we conducted an interview with her.
What did she tell you?
She told us that she didn't know why the syringe had went missing.
Had this syringe ever gone missing before, according to the defendant?
No, this was the first time they'd ever found one had gone missing.
Now, what were the next steps of your investigation?
We looked to see if anyone had a potential motive to kill Don Clark.
Did you find a motive?
We did. We found a motive specifically for Kara Clark at the time, now Kara Bassett.
What was this motive?
Well, this motive was if Don disappeared or became incapacitated, she would gain control over all of his assets, including the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park.
You mentioned the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park. Why was this important to the defendant?
In the interview we conducted with her, she told us that she had been very upset with the way Don Clark had been running it. He'd been running it like a zoo. She told us that the elephants were in cages and could be ridden on. She expressed her distaste for the treatment of the elephants.
Had the defendant taken any steps to control this property prior to Mr. Clark's disappearance?
She told us that she'd requested several times that Don eliminate all the cages and have it be a sanctuary full time.
And did she take any legal steps?
She had Don sign a power of attorney document in May of 2017.
I'm now showing you Exhibit 15. Is this that power of attorney document you mentioned?
Yes, it is.
Now, what is a power of attorney document?
It's a document that gives the attorney, in fact, complete control over all of their assets if they become incapacitated, or in this case, if they disappear.
And who is the attorney, in fact, in this document?
Kara Clark.
Now, was there anything unusual about this power of attorney document?
Yes, the disappearance clause in the document, it's not common.
What do you mean?
I spoke with Mandy Tuminelli, the attorney who was in charge of this document, and she told me that she'd never seen a disappearance clause before, and in my investigations, I've never come across one.
Objection, hearsay.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes.
This statement came from a document that was already admitted into evidence, and so Agent Branham is able to testify to it.
Do you wish to be heard, defense counsel, on the grounds for your hearsay objection?
Yes, Your Honor. Whilst this particular letter has been entered into evidence, the individual statements within that letter, within this power of attorney document, have not been verified, or the claim that Agent Branham is making that a disappearance clause would be unusual has also not been verified. It is an out-of-court statement within a piece of evidence that's being offered for the truth of the matter.
So what exactly is the hearsay statement that you are objecting to?
Well, this is an answer based off of hearsay, I'm sorry, in that it's unusual for a disappearance clause to be included within a power of attorney document.
Got it. So is your objection to the witness's testimony?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Do you wish to be heard on that, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. Agent Branham specifically referenced a attorney's statement that has been already pre-admitted into evidence. And so in this case, this hearsay statement is admissible.
All right. Thank you both. I will allow the testimony to stand. Objection overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Agent Brandon, I'll ask the question again. Why was this disappearance clause unusual?
In my correspondence with Don Clark's attorney, Mandy Tuminelli, she told me she's never seen a disappearance clause in a power of attorney document before. And in my time with the FBI investigating, I've never come across a power of attorney with a disappearance clause.
And what does that disappearance clause mean?
It means that if Don Clark were to disappear, Kara would take control of his assets.
When was this document signed?
It was signed in May of 2017.
And how long before Mr. Clark's disappearance was that?
It was 3 months.
And when did Ms. Bassett take control of the property using this power of attorney?
She officially took control in the beginning of October of 2017, approximately 6 weeks after Dawn's disappearance.
Agent Brandon, what were your final steps regarding this investigation?
After determining the activity from August 18th, the potential murder weapon on the site, and the motive Kara Clark had, I arrested Kara for the murder of Don Clark.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
Examination, Your Honor.
Thank you. Yes, you may cross-examine the witness.
Good afternoon, Special Agent Burnham.
Good afternoon.
You told us on direct examination that you searched the park where my client lived and found that a syringe of carfentanil or elephant tranquilizer was missing, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
And then you were asked if you had any reason to believe that a syringe was used for an elephant, and you said no. Or did you find any evidence that a syringe was used to kill Don Clark?
No, ma'am, we have no evidence of what this syringe was used for.
Okay. Did you have any evidence to believe that a murder took place?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your question.
Well, you said you were looking for a murder weapon. Did you have any reason to believe that a murder took place upon your arrival?
At our arrival on the property, we found no signs of struggle, but with no activity on Dawn's accounts, we were able to find reason that there could have been a murder.
To clarify, you arrived at this park a week after Don Clark's disappearance and immediately decided to look for a murder weapon?
No, that's not correct. Our first part of our investigation was determining when he disappeared, and then we had to search the property to see if it could have potentially been a murder.
Okay. I now ask that Exhibit 19 be displayed on screen, please. Thank you. Now, according to Exhibit 19, which you've just testified to, on August 18th, 24 syringes of carfentanil remained on the park. You began your investigation on August 25th, right?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
And can you recall the exact date that you counted the remaining carfentanil syringes?
I believe that would have been August 27th.
Okay. So at least a week passed, actually a little over a week passed, between August 18th, when 24 syringes were counted, and when your team counted the number of syringes remaining, correct?
That's correct.
So you can't say with any certainty that a syringe actually went missing on August 18th, can you?
No, ma'am, we can't determine the exact date.
And do you recall whether you specifically counted those syringes?
I don't recall, ma'am.
Okay. I understand that after you searched the elephant park, you went to Big Gum Swamp, correct?
That's correct. We investigated Big Gum Swamp.
You took trained dogs with you, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
They were given Clark's scent to see if you could find him.
To see if the dogs could find him, yes, ma'am.
And this search would have been at most 2 weeks after Don Clark's disappearance, correct?
Yes, ma'am. The team went out in late August.
Did you find any of Don Clark's remains during that search?
No, ma'am, we did not.
Did you find Don Clark's phone?
No, we were able to access his phone records, but we never got a hold of his actual cell phone.
You didn't find his wallet, did you?
No, ma'am, we haven't found his wallet.
You didn't find his keys, did you?
No, ma'am, we didn't find his car keys, but we did find the van they belonged to.
And that was at the Belle Leon Airport, correct?
The Carrie Belle Leon Airport, yes, ma'am.
In this van, there was Don Clark's hair, correct?
Yes, we found 6 of Don Clark's hairs on the bed of the back of the van.
But isn't it true that Don Clark owned this van?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
If I understand correctly, it was also in that van that you collected algae samples, right?
Yes, ma'am. We collected algae samples from the driver's side.
These samples were consistent with both algae at the Big Gum Swamp and at my client's park, correct?
We did not test for algae at the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park. We were only able to determine that it was a rare combination of algae also present at the Big Gum Swamp.
You testified on direct examination that they were consistent with samples found at my client's park, by which I mean boots, right?
Oh, yes. They were consistent with the boots.
But I'm going to read from Exhibit 5, if we could have that on screen, please. Quote, "These materials can remain on surfaces for months and can be transferred by contact. We did not test or collect any samples from Big Gum Swamp against any natural substances, for example, dirt, watering holes, at the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park or other Florida swamps." And that's highlighted in yellow for you. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, ma'am, you did.
So this algae does not definitively prove that my client has ever been to Big Gum Swamp, does it?
No, ma'am. The forensic report only tells us the type of algae we found.
Okay, now let's circle back and discuss interviews a little more. Did you interview Miss Bassett as part of your investigation?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
You actually interviewed her dozens of times, right?
We interviewed her 12 times, yes.
Her statements were generally consistent, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
You also spoke to Lisa Clark, Don Clark's ex-wife, right?
We weren't able to speak with Lisa, as she refused to be interviewed by our team.
But she did tell you that Don Clark deserved to die, correct?
Yes, ma'am, she did.
You interviewed Don Clark's attorney, right?
I received a letter from Mandy Tuminelli, that's correct.
And within that letter, you learned that he sought to buy property in Costa Rica, right?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
He sought to do so using cash that was, quote, off the books,
Yes, ma'am.
meaning it wouldn't reflect in bank records.
According to the letter, yes.
Agent Brenham, did you ever travel to Costa Rica?
No, the FBI doesn't have jurisdiction in Costa Rica.
You didn't ever conduct interviews in Costa Rica, did you?
No, we relied on the Costa Rican authorities to conduct an investigation.
Based on what they told you, you cannot definitively say that Don Clark is not alive and well in Costa Rica, can you?
As I was never able to go to Costa Rica myself, I can't definitively say that. However, the Costa Rican authorities' investigation told us that there was no evidence he was, according to what they found.
Agent Brenham, you never recovered a body, did you?
No, ma'am, we never found his body.
Does any forensic evidence definitively conclude that Don Clark is dead?
No, ma'am, without a body, we can't provide an autopsy that would give that evidence.
Do you have any eyewitnesses to this supposed murder?
No, ma'am, we have no eyewitnesses.
Can you therefore sit on that witness stand today and state under penalty of perjury that you know Don Clark to be dead?
No, ma'am, we can't say for sure that he's dead without an autopsy. We just have the evidence we've provided.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Special Agent Branham. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions at this time.
Thank you, Defense Counsel. Any further witnesses from the government?
Your Honor, before we begin, a brief redirect.
Sure, go ahead.
Miss Bassett, Miss Agent Branham, based on the evidence you reviewed, is Mr. Clark dead?
Based on the evidence we collected and the fact that he was declared legally dead in 2018, all the evidence points to Don Clark being dead.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Anything further from the defense on this witness?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. Special Agent, you may be excused. And does the government have any further witnesses for their case?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the government rests its.
Thank you. Defense will hear from your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Joe Young to the witness stand. May I proceed?
You may.
Good afternoon, Ms. Young.
Good afternoon.
What do you do for a living?
Well, I'm a famous TV producer. You've probably heard some of my films. I'm actually on set right now. I took time out of my day to actually testify here.
Thank you. Are you familiar with the defendant, Cara Bassett?
Yes, I've known her for about 2 years, so I would believe I know her pretty well.
And what's your relationship with Miss Bassett?
Well, she contacted me in 2015, asking me to make a documentary for her because, of course, she was a big fan of my work, so I agreed.
For transparency's sake, how much did Miss Bassett pay you for filming this documentary?
Well, she paid me what I was worth, $5,000 a month.
While you were filming this documentary, how much film did you actually produce?
Well, I was there from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, so I actually recorded 2,000 hours worth of footage.
Was any of this film subpoenaed as part of a police investigation into the disappearance of Don Clark?
Actually, no. They never asked me for any of this footage. Sadly. I worked pretty hard on it.
How long did you film after Don Clark's disappearance, if at all?
I filmed all the way up to Cara Bassett's arrest.
Ms. Young, what is Exhibit 47?
Exhibit 47 is the video that I took of Kelsey Stebbins. Very hard worker. She actually lost part of her leg in an elephant accident.
Could we have Exhibit 47 displayed on screen, please? Do you recognize?
I don't get it. I worked with Dawn and Kara every day for
Your
5
Honor,
years,
before they
but
play
the
this
police
video,
didn't
maybe
ask me a
this
single.
video is played outside the constructed sidebar. Outside.
Sorry, I think you cut out. You're cutting out a bit.
Can you hear me now?
It's your volume is a little bit quiet.
If you're able to hear me, Your Honor,
A little bit.
may we ask that this video is played outside the earshot of the jury as it has not been entered into evidence yet?
Yes, we'll go into we'll do a constructive sidebar. You can go. Do you need the video played at this time?
No, Your Honor, that was a technical difficulty.
Okay, never mind. Then I think that should be addressed.
Well, Ms. Young, from what you saw of that,
objection. All right, go ahead.
from what you saw of that video, did it appear to be a truthful and accurate depiction of the interview that you conducted with Miss Kelsey Stebbins?
Yes, it was.
At this time, the people move to enter Exhibit 47 into evidence. The defense, excuse me.
Any objections?
Yes, Your Honor. The government objects to hearsay.
And what is the grounds for your objection?
Kelsey Stebbins is making statements, and these statements are out-of-court statements that are offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
So is your objection to the contents of the video and what the speaker in the video is saying?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, defense, do you wish to be heard?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense isn't offering this for the truth of the matter that Kelsey Stebbins was definitively not interviewed by the FBI, but for the inconsistency and for the fact that the FBI never pursued these claims.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Yes.
So this video is a video that states that when the syringes were missing, it's being offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
How so?
Because this video would have an effect on, is being for the truth of the matter asserted and not the effect on the listener, because this video has statements. We might maybe ask for this video to be played outside the earshot of the jury.
Do you wish to, are you asking that for the purposes of your objection right now?
Yes, Your Honor. I can't remember which exhibit this is.
All
Can
right.
I summarize for Your Honor to save some time?
Pardon me? I didn't hear
Can I
you.
summarize for Your Honor just to save the time of playing that video?
Yes, we are in constructive sidebar right now. Why don't we go ahead and have defense counsel just briefly summarize it and see if that refreshes your memory before we actually play the video.
In this particular video, Kelsey Stebbins, an employee of the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park, claims that she was never interviewed by the FBI.
All right. Is that
May I
enough?
respond?
Yes.
So because Kelsey Stebbins is claiming that she was never interviewed by the FBI, it is a video being offered for the truth of the matter asserted that she was never interviewed by the FBI.
I tend to agree. Defense, you have a response to that?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense does not contend that Kelsey Stebbins was definitively not interviewed by the FBI, but that Kelsey Stebbins' statement does not match up with Steph Branham's statement, which could lead to questions with regards to Steph Branham's credibility and the comprehensiveness of the FBI investigation.
I understand the relevance of that, but how does that, her statements and being offered for that purpose, either not qualify as hearsay or fall under one of the exceptions for hearsay?
Well, again, it doesn't qualify as hearsay because it's an out-of-court statement that's not being offered for the truth of the matter.
If you're offering it to show the inconsistency, then isn't that presuming that her statements are true?
Again, the defense does not contend that Kelsey Stebbins really was not interviewed by police. In fact, it's very possible that she was, but it's the fact that there's some confusion that perhaps Kelsey Stebbins didn't even realize that she was interviewed, which would suggest that it was not a comprehensive interview.
Thank you. Both of your responses are noted. I will sustain the objection. If you have, counsel, if you can lay more foundation or bring it in under a different, something that in a way that's not objectionable, then you may attempt to do that.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Young, did you ever witness an interview with park employee Kelsey Stebbins?
No, I didn't see an interview with her. They also didn't interview me. I don't know why they wouldn't want to talk to me.
How in-depth was your knowledge of the elephant park?
Very in-depth. As I said, I was there from Monday through Friday, working 9 to 5s.
I'd like to draw your attention to Exhibit 19, if we can have that displayed on screen. Are you familiar with Exhibit 19?
I can't see it on the screen.
I'm sorry. If you're unable to show that on screen, I do have a physical copy which I can show you. Great.
I see it now.
Exhibit 19?
Excuse me, can you re-ask that question?
Are you familiar with Exhibit 19, which is displayed on screen now?
Yes, I am. It's the log of the elephant tranquilizers that were kept at the elephant park. Kara was very specific about that log.
Based on your knowledge of your time working at the park, how many other people had access to the elephant tranquilizers that this log tracks?
To my knowledge, there were about a dozen people that had access to that elephant tranquilizer stuff.
And to your knowledge, did they need Cara Bassett's permission to access those tranquilizers?
No, actually, they all had a key to the storage facility.
Did you ever see members of the FBI collect these tranquilizers?
Actually, yeah, and I saw one of the younger agents handling it without gloves. I mean, I'm not an investigator, but it kind of seemed off to me.
Okay, now let's talk about the relationship between Don Clark and Cara Bassett. What observations did you make of that relationship?
They seemed very loving. They loved to dote on each other.
To your knowledge, was that relationship ever physically violent?
Oh, I never saw Kara or Don hurt each other. No.
Were you aware of any of Don Clark's previous relationships?
Oh, yes, I was. His ex-wife, Lisa Clark, she would often visit the park and start stuff with him, like arguments.
Did you observe
Your Honor, character?
Can you repeat, what was the testimony? Statement? Did the witness already?
Excuse me?
Yeah, or either, go ahead, yes, please.
Oh, I had said that she had started arguments with Clark often.
And what are the grounds for your objection?
Your Honor, in this case, the defense is bringing this testimony out to show propensity, as if Lisa Clark got violent once, she might get violent again, and this is character evidence.
Defense counsel, do you wish to be heard?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense is not offering this to show Ms. Clark's propensity for violence or contending that she had one at all, but to show that Ms. Clark had been in an argument with Mr. Clark at this park and that the FBI never pursued that further.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Sure.
I was talking about the statements that she had about Lisa. Yeah, Lisa Clark, not Mrs. Bassett's previous surname, Kara Clark. So yes, I'm talking about those statements by Lisa Clark, and those are a character.
What was the statement? If you can refresh my memory, because
And that Lisa Clark had gotten violent with Mr. Clark in the past.
did the witness testify to that? I thought, or was it, because the witness just said something about arguing. Did she also say something about the violence?
I'm sorry, about the argument, yes.
Okay, your objection is overruled. You may proceed.
Finish your answer, Miss Young.
I had just said that she would often argue with him and just come to the elephant park. Oh, excuse me. And that would be the routine of her just coming to the elephant park. Sorry for the technical difficulties. This isn't very professional.
No worries. When did you last see Don Clark?
I last saw him at August 18th, 2017 at about 6 p.m. I just got finished my shift. Excuse me for a second.
On that day, did Cara Bassett's behavior strike you as abnormal?
Actually, no. She was pretty normal that day. Same old Cara.
Are you familiar with Exhibit 48? This is an interview that you filmed with Ms. Kelsey Stebbins, if we can have that on screen.
The day he disappeared, I heard him on the
Your
phone.
Honor,
He
may we
was
also ask
speaking
that this
Spanish.
video be played outside the earshot of the jury?
Again, Your Honor, it automatically began playing. The defense did not intend to play that to the jury.
Sure.
My apologies.
Okay. So let's go ahead. I guess let's let defense counsel proceed, and if you still have an objection, government, you can do that.
Ms. Young, looking just at this still of this video that you recorded, does it appear to be a truthful and accurate depiction of an interview that you conducted with Ms. Kelsey Stebbins?
Yes, miss.
At this time, the defense moves Exhibit 48 into evidence.
Your Honor, again, the government objects to hearsay.
And what is your grounds for the hearsay objection?
Again, these statements by Stebbins are an out-of-court statement being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. And before I continue my argument, may I ask defense counsel briefly summarize this video?
Sure. Defense counsel, can you please summarize this briefly?
In this video, Kelsey Stebbins claims that she heard Don Clark speaking on the phone in Spanish on the day of his disappearance. Now, again, this isn't being offered for the truth of the matter, but for subsequent actions, or the subsequent actions that should have taken place by investigator Steph Brenham, who took no action into investigating who Don Clark might have been speaking to on that day.
Any response?
Yes, Your Honor. Despite this video is not being offered for the effect on Ms. Stebbins, and this is being offered for the truth of the matter asserted as compared to the FBI agent's actions, and so we sustain our objectives.
Defense, did the, I guess, investigator see this video?
Investigator did not see this video. He did not ask to see. She did not ask to see this video or pursue any information contained within this video.
Okay, so what is the effect, or I guess what is the subsequent action or effect on the listener that?
It's the fact that this information was out there, it existed, and Steph Brenham not only didn't hear this information prior to their arrest of Ms. Bassett, but didn't pursue this at all.
Understood. I will sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Young, did Don Clark say anything to you on the day of his disappearance?
Yes. Actually, I spoke to him a few hours before he disappeared. We were actually having this conversation. I was telling him about my trip that I was going to take to Costa Rica. Not to Costa Rica, to Mexico. And during the middle of me talking, he got this text message on his phone, and then all of the color from his face just rushed down. He went as pale as a ghost. And then he had just said that he had to deal with something and just scurried off.
Have you spoken to Don Clark since that interaction?
Unfortunately, no.
Did you at any point investigate the disappearance of Don Clark?
Actually, yes. Not too long after, I took my own personal trip to Costa Rica.
And what did your investigation in Costa Rica include?
Well, I looked at Don Clark's home. I talked to some Costa Rican locals and the law enforcement there as well.
What did your search of Don Clark's home reveal?
Well, I snuck in, first of all. The FBI already knows this. But when I looked inside, the place was spotless. There wasn't a speck of dust anywhere. It looked like someone was cleaning the place. And I looked in Don's closet, and his clothes were still hanging up. And there was a fan on, as if somebody was sitting in there and it was hot.
What did your discussion with locals reveal?
Excuse me, it cut out for me.
What did your discussion with Costa Rican locals reveal?
They said they saw Don recently.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
May I respond, Your Honor?
First, what's the hearsay statement?
That the locals had seen Don Clark recently. This is a statement being offered for the truth of the matter, so they sent that report.
And your response?
Again, this isn't being offered for the truth of the matter. It's being offered for the fact that there were people who claimed to see Don Clark who had never been interviewed. It speaks to the holes in the government investigation. If people claim they saw Don Clark, those people should have been interviewed. The government should have a record of that.
I'll let this in. Objection overruled.
Did you finish your response, Ms. Young?
Well, they said they had seen him pretty recently around Costa Rica.
What did your discussion with police reveal?
They had stopped looking for him right soon after they started.
Again, Your Honor, I object to hearsay.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. Again, this is not being offered for the truth of the matter, but to show that Special Agent Branham did not pursue all leads. The government should have a record that the Costa Rican investigation ended shortly after it began. We haven't heard that in court today.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Sure.
In order to compare this testimony with the FBI, you have to acknowledge the truth value that it is being asserted for. So this isn't adequate to being offered.
You are cutting out again, but I think I got the gist of what you're saying. Again, I do think this is questionable on hearsay grounds, but I'll let the testimony in. So please just proceed.
Ms. Young, did you finish your answer in that case?
Yes, I did finish.
Ms. Young, since his disappearance, have you seen any evidence that Don Clark is no longer alive?
No, I haven't seen any evidence that he wasn't living.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions at this time.
Thank you. Cross-examination?
Your Honor, before I begin, may I take a brief moment to change my microphone?
Yes.
Are you able to hear me now?
Thank you. You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Young. Now,
Well, good afternoon, Counselor.
you've been working at the park for 3 years, right?
Yes, I have.
You've been working at the park for 5 days a week.
Yes, Monday through Friday, as I mentioned several times.
So you'd say that you knew the defendant and her husband pretty well.
Oh, very well.
Now, while you were there, you understood that the defendant and her husband disagreed on how to run the park.
Yeah, people disagree on certain things. sometimes. Comes with marriage.
The
I would
defendant
know. I'm
wanted
married.
The defendant wanted to create an elephant sanctuary, while Mr. Clark wanted to make a zoo.
I believe that was the disagreement that happened.
In fact, the defendant has had you delete video footage of them arguing.
Yeah, it was just too negative for the documentary. They just wanted to keep all the happiness to the film. Yeah.
I understand, Miss Young. Now, you stated on direct that they have never been violent in the past, but you actually saw a fight between the defendant and Mr. Clark where she threw a vase at his head.
Yes, but it was just a small elephant vase that she had gotten from a gift shop. She had missed, of course.
That's a yes to my question. She threw a vase.
Yes, counselor, she threw a vase, a very small elephant vase.
Now, let's talk about what the defendant didn't do after Mr. Clark disappeared. Now, Miss Lee, could you put up the defendant's phone records on the screen? You've seen these documents before, haven't you?
Yes, I was shown them during my interview on 64 Minutes.
Right, you've been asked questions about these before?
A little bit, a few, yeah.
So you know that in the week that Mr. Clark was missing, the defendant never called Mr. Clark.
No, she actually didn't.
Now, let's take a look at the back of this document. You also know that the defendant never texted Mr. Clark in that week.
No.
In fact, you know in that week, she never mentions Mr. Clark's disappearance to anyone.
No, she didn't.
Now, you mentioned in July of 2018 that you went to Costa Rica.
Yes, I did.
Now, you didn't see any food in the refrigerator, did you?
No, I didn't see any food there, but the place was spotless.
You didn't see any toiletries in the bathroom?
No, but I did see the fan running.
You watched this house for a week.
Yes, I did. Not all the time for 24 hours a day, but I would check in on it from time to time, for a little bit out of the day.
Right, and you never saw anyone come or go during this time?
No, I didn't see anyone go in and out, but I don't know if they did or didn't.
And in fact, you couldn't just like walk in the front door. You had to sneak in through a window.
Yes, unfortunately, he didn't give me a key, and I'm kind of nosy.
Now, Miss Lee, can you put up exhibits 26 on the screen? Now, this is a picture of Mr. Clark's van, right?
Yes.
And you've also seen these GPS records before?
Yes, I was also shown them during my interview of 64 Minutes.
Right, you were shown them and you answered questions on them.
A little bit of questions, yes.
And so you know that this van drove to the Big Gum Swamp at 11:17 p.m.
Yes, I was told that. Nothing more, nothing less.
You knew this van drove 139 miles.
Oh, it was, yes.
Halfway across the state of Florida.
I guess that would be 139 miles.
Now, you've never seen Mr. Clark drive here for work, have you?
No, neither Miss Bassett. I didn't really see anyone use the Elephant Park's van.
You have no idea why this van drove halfway across the state of Florida in the middle of the night.
No clue.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Any further from defense on this witness?
No redirect examination, Your Honor.
Thank you. Then Ms. Young, you may be excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
This time the defense rests.
So let's go ahead and move into closing arguments. We can switch back to speaker view. I think at this time the juries can complete the witness portion of their ballots. Are you ready to proceed with your closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may go ahead.
Members of the jury, today you saw the footprints of evidence that trailed the defendant from the Big Gum Swamp the night she killed Mr. Clark. You may be asking yourself, why would a woman kill her husband? Well, the answer is simple. She may have loved Don Clark, but she had loved a dream of opening an elephant sanctuary for far longer. When the defendant, Mr. Clark, poisoned the defendant's dreams, she decided it was time to poison him back. Now, we as the prosecution, we have the burden of proof in today's case. That means we have to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did two things. First, that she killed Mr. Clark, and second, that she did it with malice aforethought, which just means she did it intentionally. Now, understand that reasonable doubt isn't a doubt based on what ifs. It's a doubt based on facts and evidence. And today, you have seen no such doubt, because there is no other reasonable explanation for how these facts happened. Now, you heard today that when the defendant married Mr. Clark made her two promises, one during their vows and one to help her create an elephant sanctuary. But as they continued in their marriage, Mr. Clark started exploiting her animals, locking them in cages and letting people ride them. And to the defendant, he was exploiting her babies. You heard how their arguments got violent. And on 2017, the defendant decided it was time to poison Mr. Clark back. So first, she made a plan. She had her husband sign a disappearance clause in a power of attorney document. Notice that she had her husband sign it, knowing that if Mr. Clark disappeared, she would get the elephant park and the $8 million in assets. So what happened next? Mr. Clark disappeared in what the defendant thought was the perfect crime. But let's follow her trail of evidence. Now, second, she created a weapon. You heard how the defendant lives right next to a container of carfentanil, an elephant tranquilizer. Now, the defense is trying to make you believe that this carfentanil disappearing was just a coincidence, but think about it. This was the perfect murder weapon for the defendant. It was small, it was easy to access, it's stored right next to her house. All the defendant needed was a few drops of this substance to quickly, quietly, and cleanly kill Mr. Clark. So it's no coincidence that the one time this syringe goes missing is when Mr. Clark vanishes. Third, she picked a place. You heard today that Miss Bassett's van drove 139 miles across the state of Florida to the Big Gum Swamp, a 13,000-acre marsh, perfect for hiding a body. She stopped there for 40 minutes, enough time to hide a body well. But Agent Branham told you she hid the body pretty well, but she couldn't hide the evidence she left behind, the algae from the swamps. Agent Branham told you that this was a very rare, very specific algae to the Big Gum Swamp, and it was on Mr. Clark's van, no surprise, but also on the defendant's wheelchair and the defendant's boots. The defendant thought she had hidden her crime well. As you can see today, she left behind evidence. Members of the jury, there is no other reasonable explanation for how this could have happened. Any explanation the defense tries to give you will not add up. So the second question is this: did the defendant kill Mr. Clark intentionally? And you saw that today because she covered her crime up. Now, she waited 1 week to call the police. And in this week, she never called Mr. Clark. She never texted Mr. Clark. And I want you to think about it. If Miss Bassett hadn't killed Mr. Clark, wouldn't she have tried to contact him before he called the police? But she never did. She never contacted him or mentioned him to anyone else because she already knew what happened to him. Now, while the defendant waited, Mr. Clark's body was in the Big Gum Swamp. She gave nature a full 7 days to dispose of Mr. Clark's body in a hot, wet, animal-ridden swamp. Nature did its job well. Ladies and gentlemen, you followed the plan, you followed the weapon, you followed her place, and you followed the cover-up, and it all leads this trail of evidence straight back to the defendant. The defense's explanations aren't reasonable doubt. They're asking you to doubt your reason. And what was the result of her actions? She got what she wanted. 6 weeks after Mr. Clark disappeared, the defendant invoked the power of attorney. turning the elephant zoo into a sanctuary. The poison worked. Nothing stood in the way of her dream. Members of the jury, Mr. Clark poisoned the defendant's dreams, so she poisoned him back. Today, we have met our burden. Find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. Defense counsel, ready for your closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor. On trial for a murder that never happened. But we just don't know. We've heard testimony from FBI Special Agent Steph Branham, who led this investigation. She couldn't say with any certainty that Don Clark was dead. We've heard from Joe Young, a filmmaker who worked closely with my client and Don Clark. Ms. Young certainly didn't have any information suggesting that Don Clark is dead. And if we don't know if Don Clark is dead, what are we doing here? Most importantly, what is Steph Branham doing here? She should be in her office, determining who might have wanted to hurt Don Clark, or in Costa Rica, investigating the possibility that Mr. Clark simply ran away, or with a forensics team at Big Gum Swamp, trying to find out what exactly happened there, because yes, bodies do decompose. Wallets don't, phones don't, keys don't, so where are they? Steph Branham should not be in court testifying in a trial for a murder that may never have happened. You, members of the jury, should not be in court listening to testimony about a murder that may never have happened. My client should not be on trial for a murder that never happened. Before we go any further, let's discuss the law in today's case. The prosecution must prove my client's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. What does this mean? In order for you, the jury, to convict my client, all other reasonable explanations for Don Clark's disappearance must have been completely eliminated, such that the only explanation for his disappearance was that Cara Bassett murdered him. Time and time again, the prosecution has fallen short of that burden. They haven't proven that Cara Bassett stole a syringe, that Cara Bassett dumped her husband's body in a swamp, and this is the most important shortcoming. They haven't proven that Don Clark is dead. Because through and through, this investigation has been one plagued with oversight. Steph Branham took the witness stand today and said on cross-examination, there is no evidence that he is dead. But then on redirect examination, all the evidence suggests that Don Clark is dead. What was Ms. Branham talking about? Two directly contradictory statements, excuse me. One of them claiming that all the evidence suggests Don Clark is dead? What? Because there was no activity on his bank account? Mind you, there was no body. His phone, wallet, keys were never recovered. There were so many leads that just weren't followed. Members of the jury, Joe Young made an observation of the FBI's investigation, and this is critical because the prosecution's case depends on Cara Bassett, my client, stealing a syringe of elephant tranquilizer. We know from that log, Exhibit 19, that on August 18th, when Don Clark disappeared, 24 syringes of tranquilizer remained. A whole week elapsed before the FBI investigation began, and in that week, any number of people could have failed to log that they were using a syringe. But this is the most important part. There could have been all 24 syringes when the FBI arrived. Because Joe Young acted as a government watchdog. She saw that a younger agent was handling evidence without gloves, handling those syringes without gloves. And if they were handling those syringes without gloves, who's to say they didn't just misplace one? Who's to say the FBI didn't lose that syringe? Members of the jury, it's impossible to say exactly what happened to that missing syringe. That's something that Steph Branham herself admitted. Was it used on an elephant? Was it lost by investigators? We don't know, but that is the point. As with virtually All other aspects of this investigation, we just don't know. As concerning as the mishandling of evidence is, it's not the only reason that the prosecution have failed to prove that any murder took place. Because again, as you've heard throughout this trial, Don Clark's body was never recovered. How could this be? Well, Joe Young has a theory. That's because Joe Young did what the FBI should have done all along. She went to Costa Rica, where Don Clark regularly visited and owned a home. Joe Young told us that almost a year after Don Clark's disappearance, his Costa Rica home was clean, there was a fan on, his clothes were in the closet. Just as the FBI should have done, Joe Young showed Don Clark's photo to locals, some of whom said they recognized him. Do we know if they were remembering correctly? Can we be sure? No, of course not. But because the FBI never went to Costa Rica to investigate the possibility that Don Clark simply ran away, it's another unfollowed lead. Members of the jury, if this all sounds confusing, overwhelming, convoluted, it's because it is. In a perfect world, I would be able to sit here and tell you that I knew what happened. In a perfect world, I would be able to say Don Clark definitely ran away to Costa Rica, or was definitely part of a business deal gone wrong, or met his fate in some other way. But the fact is, we just don't know. We don't know if Don Clark is even alive, let alone why or how he disappeared. But we should. Had the FBI led a comprehensive and sound investigation, we would. The unfortunate truth is that they didn't. As a result, there's so much we don't know. Perhaps all it would have taken would have been interviewing park employees or Costa Rican locals who might have seen something they didn't know was important. But in the absence of a complete investigation, the prosecution has failed to meet their burden. You were told in the beginning of this trial, you would see a trail of evidence. I ask opposing counsel where that evidence is. They have failed to prove that any murder even took place, let alone that my client is a murderer. For that reason, I ask you to return a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a rebuttal from the prosecution?
Yes, Your Honor. A well-hidden crime does not equal doubt. A well-hidden body is the defendant's job, members of the jury. Because circumstantial evidence isn't a bad word. Your jury instructions say that you can return a verdict on circumstantial evidence. And now the defense is trying to say that the power of attorney was just a coincidence, that the algae was just a coincidence, that the access to the syringe was just a coincidence, that the Vans trip was just a coincidence. But members of the jury, coincidence after coincidence after coincidence equals no coincidence at all. Because as you've seen, the defendant left behind a trail of evidence. There's no doubt in this case, only facts. Find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further from the defense?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. All right. Thank you both. I think at this time we can end this round. Jurors, please go ahead and submit your ballots. And if you could also just send a private message to me, scoring judges, and letting me know when you're finished so that we can begin comments. Thank you.